Sure. Good morning. I am Robbie Koen. Age is 60 years old, and currently I work at the Cairo Women's Shelter. I was born in Cairo in 1964 to the Reverend Dr. Charles Koen and his wife Clydia Koen. I have lived in Cairo for the vast majority of my life, except for the times when I had gone to college. I graduated from an HBCU in Nashville, Fisk University, of which I enjoyed every second of that experience, thanks be to my dad. And I say that because he encouraged me highly to go there. And then I also went to law school for a while in the late 80s, early 90s. So during those two periods, I wasn't in Cairo. When I returned to Cairo in 91, it was attributable a lot to the fact that my dad had actually been imprisoned in the federal system. And a lot of that was attributable to work that he had done with the United Front, which is a African American organization here in Cairo. And I'm going to just be honest, he was brought up on a lot of false charges. They accused him of burning his own building, which was a bank building, and thus he ended up having to go to prison from 91 to 95. And he had asked me to come back to help the family because at that particular time, my youngest brother was still in high school. Therefore, there was a lot of assistance that both he and my mother needed. But thanks be to God, I was not the only one that assisted. We were also assisted by a wonderful congregation in Chicago by the name of Christian Hope that was pastored by Dr. Brady was his name. And he was just a very wise and compassionate person who took my dad under his wings, not only obviously in good times, but also in not so good times as well. And they definitely helped and shepherded us through that period. And I would definitely be remiss if I did not also state that we were very, very well cared for and assisted by the Minister Louis Farrakhan, who did, I know, at least 5 different engagements with my dad to help with paying for his legal bills as well as his appeal once he was in prison. After being here while I was here, I started working with the school district. I did an alcohol and drug program for a while, and then after that, I started working with Head Start. And actually, from '95 until 2023, I was the director of our local Head Start program. Only reason why probably I'm not doing it now is that Southern 7 Health Department Head Start decided to close our building for various reasons. One of which they claimed was that the building was, they were not able to afford to renovate the building. So so as you can see, I've lived the majority of my life in Cairo. The experiences that I've had in Cairo, but particularly the experiences I've had being brought up by my dad and my mom, and definitely seeing the lived experience of my dad has definitely made a tremendous impact upon my life and a tremendous impact upon my vision in life and my commitment to certain things in life. I will tell you, just without you even starting with it, one of the most impressionable things that happened in my life when literally I think I was 6 years old was I experienced our homes, which we lived in Pyramid Courts at the time, which was considered the black projects because Pyramid Courts was considered the black projects, Elmwood was considered the white projects. But it was shot into for 169 consecutive nights. So often when I talk to people about this, because there have been other times when I've talked with people both professionally and unprofessionally about this experience, I explain to them, this is not something that my parents told me or that my grandmother told me. I lived it. And thus, as a result, it was shot into by a group called the White Hats here in Cairo. And it was white men, businessmen, people who were part of institutions, etc. They got out, they shot into Pyramid Courts. And it was as a result of of women and men of the United Front organizing and deciding that they were going to come against a lot of inequities and discrimination that was happening in Cairo, one of which being that blacks were not hired downtown. So thus, the United Front organized a boycott of the downtown area. And what we would do on Saturdays, there would be a rally at what was considered, well, it was considered the St. Columbus Church at that time, but the Catholic Diocese was very, very much so involved with the movement here. There were actually 2 priests who were involved with the movement here, and thus the Catholic Church ended up giving that land to the United Front. But we would have a rally at this church, and then after the rally, we would do a march through the downtown area. My mother's family is from actually Mississippi. It is called like the Greenwood area, Edabina, Greenwood. My mom was literally born in what is called Morgan City, Mississippi. So during the northward migration, they ended up coming up from Mississippi here to Cairo. My dad's parents were actually born in Kentucky, but migrated here. But they were here for the majority of the time. And when I say my dad's parents, I probably really more so mean like my dad's mom and my dad's grandfather, because my dad's dad and his mom never married. So consequently, he's the only Koen in his family. There were 15 of them. He was the eldest of all of the siblings. But it's a very strong extended family unit. The family unit was named the Bondurants. So basically, we know a lot about my dad's side because of that. Literally, we have a family reunion every year as a result of that real connection that that family kept. And to be honest, that family was a part of the African Methodist Episcopal Church Ward Chapel here in Cairo. I was literally christened at that church. I actually have a memory of that almost, to be honest. And my great-great-grandfather and grandmother, their names are on the cornerstone of that church because they assisted with the building of that church and were members at that time. The oldest person that I remember was my great-great-grandmother. Her name was Savannah Green. I didn't do a lot of talking with her because she was the type of person that she was older. I mean, at that time, I think she probably was well into her 80s. But literally, this is on my mother's side, literally there were 5 generations of them that lived together, because even though my father and mother were married at the time, my dad did a lot of traveling. So in order for my mom to be, protected and seen after, and they lived together a lot. So I was a part of that extended unit. So there were 5 generations of us. We even have a picture of the 5 generations. I was the 5th generation. My grandmother Lily C. Mallory, my great grandmother Willie Boykins, and then the Lady Savannah. But all of the information, like about slavery, about their experiences with Jim Crow, that all came from my grandmother Lily C. Mallory, which she was very much so a historian. Even though she didn't graduate from high school, she was very, very intelligent, and she was very deliberate about sharing the stories that she had experienced and that our family had experienced in Mississippi and even here in Cairo. So and these are not necessarily directed towards slavery, but she talked a lot about just being in abject poverty in Mississippi in the South. And one of the things that she talked about was like when so Savannah was her grandmother. When her grandmother's husband died, and consequently he was years older than she was, literally they kept his body in the house for a long amount of time for people to come and see his body there in the house, because I guess that was their way of doing mourning at that time. It was she didn't describe them like literally like taking him somewhere to be embalmed. He was there at the house. And she talked about, I can't remember exactly, but she talked about different things they did to try to, cut down on any smell until they removed him from the house. She talked a lot about the black families being very connected to one another. It was very common for black families to let other people come by and stay with them if they needed to stay there, if they needed food. And what was very much so clear was that they mostly lived together, meaning like my grandmother, her mother, my great grandmother, they really pretty much so lived together mostly. Some of the other experiences she shared was when she came to Cairo, she literally worked in the homes of white people for years, and she talked about how she was paid just very little to nothing, and that it came to a point where she literally had to look for a job outside of homes, white homes here, because she wasn't making anything. I mean, they literally were struggling with things as basic as eating. But she saw as a forward movement in her life when she began to work at St. Mary's Hospital in the culinary department, and then also when she was able to move to Pyramid Courts, because there, you definitely had running water, you definitely had heat, whereas when they lived on 21st Street here in Cairo, there were so many things. It was just substandard housing, basically, just to cut to the chase. So as I said earlier, even though Cairo is situated northern, most people think, if anyone knows anything about history, Cairo was, if you as a slave ended up in Cairo, you were sent back into slavery. Yes, if you were caught in Cairo, you were sent back to slavery. So even though Cairo was northernly located, there was always a sentiment of a southern mind. When I was young, because I remember from my parents' perspective and what we went through, Cairo was definitely very racist. As I stated, one thing I remember is that literally our homes were shot into 169 nights. And as I say to people, I experienced that. So that's not something someone told me or someone else's lived experience. It was mine. And to be honest with you, for years after that, I would wake up at night screaming, having night terrors as a result of having gone through that. It happened a lot that a lot of people would come here to be a part of the movement, or to come here to see what was going on, or to come here to offer services from everywhere, all over the nation. I remember the drummer Max Roach had come here to help in the struggle. Fannie Lou Hamer came and visited our house during the struggle. Reverend Jesse Jackson came for a rally at Ward Chapel. And actually, the beginnings of the movement happened out of Ward Chapel. That's where SNCC came into Ward Chapel and started organizing. And it was SNCC that my dad first started meeting with and actually organizing with. Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, he came to Cairo. Actually, he was in Cairo as recently as 90. I traveled to Africa with he and a group in 90 and 91. So a lot of people came to Cairo to assist with the movement, to see what they could do, to see how they could help. And some people just to be able to say, we were there during that time. And this movement was very, it was thought of as very different because during that time, of course, Dr. King was still alive up until 68. Actually, you know what? The movement here really started. The United Front was born in 69, so a year after Dr. King's death. But the emblem of the movement was not only universal spirituality, but the gun on the Bible. Because actually, the men of the United Front, Switch Wilson, Ernest Morgan, and others, they actually had to mobilize along with my dad and others, and they began to shoot back, because probably if they hadn't done that, they would have come in and kicked our doors in and shot us on the spot. And the other thing that I remember so well is that that's when my grandmother moved away. my grandmother and my great grandmother had started sleeping in the tub, because literally, I mean, when they were shooting in our community, it sounded like a war zone, like bombs going off. So it was very scary. And during that time, at some point during that time, also I noticed there was a mentioning of the National Guard. The National Guard were actually in pyramid courts. You had to go by the National Guard to get in and out of your home. I know this because I remember, now I rode the bus to school, but I also went to piano lessons. And literally there were times where if my parents couldn't come get me, my piano teacher, Mrs. Virginia Fuller, who was such a wonderful person, she would bring me home. And, she made the statement, I'm not afraid of them. I'm not going to let them, bully me. But they were literally going into pyramid courts, kicking in the doors of United Front members to try to see if they had weapons so that they can arrest them. So the National Guard was not down here to protect us. They were down here to literally harass us and bully us. Now, thanks be to God, our doors were never kicked in for one reason or another. But many of the other United Front members, their doors were kicked in and their houses were raided. They would probably start, I would say, if I recollect it well, usually start like 10 o'clock or after. And literally, there are pictures that exist of the white hats standing with guns, shooting into our community. And I think it was launched from like out of the old Custom House building, because that was the old police station. And in that area, and also there was a VFW in that area where it was launched from. And they would shoot over into pyramid courts. And it would start about 10, and it would go on maybe on up until like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Number one, of course, the issue when SNCC came in was about accommodations. And the fact that, blacks couldn't go in the doors where whites went in. Some explicit examples were like Shimwell's. We would have to go in the back door at Shimwell's if we went there. But of course, the position of the United Front, it was, you don't go in any back door. If someone expects you to go into a back door, don't go there. So like during the boycott, what United Front did was organize and have buses that took people to Cape and to Paducah to shop there. And thus, that's why the downtown looks like it looks now. Because black people started other patterns. They didn't shop downtown anymore because the white establishments were refusing to hire us. So our position was, you can't hire us, we won't shop there. The other thing is like St. Mary's Park. Black people could not go to St. Mary's Park. It was considered as the white park. So again, this went on for 169 consecutive nights. And then the other thing that happened was that there was a young GI that was here, and I can't remember the year, but he had come home like for a furlough or something. Well, he ended up being found hung in this custom house, which was the police department at that time. And that really brought about a lot of anger, and people were just tired of it. And thus, I think shortly after his hanging was when the United Front, started and came into existence. And the whole idea, again, like I said, the emblem of the United Front was the gun on the Bible. And the whole position was, we're not going to just sit and let you kill us. we're gonna shoot back. And the reason why I was on the Bible was, number one, my dad was a preacher, a pastor, but also the biblical backdrop was Nehemiah. And there's a scripture in Nehemiah where it talks about when they went back to Jerusalem to build the walls of Jerusalem. And the reasoning for building the walls of Jerusalem was for protection. But it said that Nehemiah and those who were working with him had, with one hand they were working on the wall, and with the other hand they had a weapon. So that was the reasoning behind, or the basis of the United Front. And that was that, we we're going to try to operate with nonviolence, but we're not going to operate with nonviolence when someone is literally shooting at us. Like I said before, they were businessmen in Cairo. They were in different institutions in Cairo. Like for instance, some were on the police department. Some were maybe in banking institutions. They were a part of the literal white establishment of Cairo, and they ran different businesses. So in other words, it was the actual people who were a part of the upper echelon of Cairo. Prior to, I think 79, we moved to 24th Street. But like, for instance, when I went to Bennett School, I would walk from Pyramid Courts to Bennett School. I do have to say that at the time that I went to school, there had been so much organization and agitation and advocacy by the United Front that we were treated very well. Most blacks had a lot of pride in who they were, pride in themselves as black people, pride in themselves as a black community, and there was a good level of solidarity and unity that I have to say I feel unfortunately does not exist now. And I think during that time, there was a less focus on chasing the dollar bill and chasing notoriety, and there was a more of a focus on being proud of who you were as a black person, being proud of your family, and your commitment to your family, your community, and yourself as a part of that whole collective in terms of bettering not only you, but bettering others with you. So in other words, your commitment was to more than just you and chasing the dollar. Your commitment was to leaving a legacy that affected the lives of others around you and others even unborn, those who came behind you. I lived in Pyramid Courts, so our neighborhood was very close-knit. I don't want to say everything was always hunky-dory. I mean, we had arguments sometimes between one another. I mean, honestly, particularly when I was at Bennett, I had to fight almost every day. You know, there was somebody always waiting. There was one girl that always waited to fight me until I beat her up finally. But there was this real sense of commitment to who you were as a black person, and not this idea of wearing the mask. You one way when you with your black people, you one way when you're with other whites. You had sound commitment to who you were. First of all, sound understanding of who you were, because you were taught that. That was another thing that the United Front did. United Front had like a solidarity school. So in those schools, and it didn't take the place of the actual school, but we did those things like maybe on Saturdays and during the summer. But they taught you about your history. You were taught about African history. We learned Swahili. We did a lot of things to support who we were as black people and to support our being proud of that. And I do have to say, you know, that was something that I just experienced in my home. So to see anything other than that was foreign to me. And then to go to Fisk after graduation from high school just was an extension of what I had grown up with. I mean, honestly, we always had a black Jesus on our wall. So the concept of looking at Jesus as white was foreign to me, and it was something that I didn't pretend with people about, you know. No, and when I say people, white people, whoever they were, I'm like, well, you know, Jesus is from Africa, so tell me, how could he be white? I mean, the white people that are in Africa, they migrated there. They weren't born there. And even though it's called the Middle East, we know that's Africa. That was Africa before 1948, and the drawing of the partitioning off and the giving of what is now Israel to them. So it was good. It was good. Like I said, the United Front had done a lot of fighting, a lot of advocacy. They were still on the front lines, doing a lot of advocacy for blacks. During that time, too, blacks started being involved in city government. Hattie B. Kendrick was a teacher here. She made a tremendous sacrifice because she, I think, initially started. She was a part of the first wave of the integration, and I think she ended up having some type of altercation with a white teacher. She ended up responding, and I don't want to say how she responded because I'm not quite clear on it, but she ended up losing her job because of that. And during that time, the NAACP had come in with Thurgood Marshall actually doing those test cases of integrating the schools here. And she was a part of the integration as a teacher as well. When I say she sacrificed, I mean she sacrificed because I don't think she ever was able to quote unquote work after that experience. I knew her personally, but I bring her up to say that her name was on the suit that ended up being able to help blacks get representation on the city council here. And what it did was it was a consent decree that made Cairo into wards, which ensured that there would be black representation, because prior to then, the elections were held citywide. So those people who were elected to the council were usually white, because somehow, some way, the whites were able to win those elections. I love that. But I still say somehow, some way, because if blacks were in the majority, but I mean, I don't know that because I can't say that I know that. But as a result of that consent decree, my dad, Ernest Morgan, and Elbert Bo Purchase, who happens to be a member of our family because his daughter ended up marrying my youngest brother, God rest her soul, she passed away in 23, at a very young age. But those three went on to city council in 1980, thus giving the largest black representation ever on the Cairo City Council. There was still, I think it was still white majority, but still they made a tremendous impact by the three of them being on there together. And they represented the black community. Elbert Purchase came from Ward 1, which is all the way downtown, up to I think about 16th Street. Ernest Morgan represented Pyramid Courts, which is where we live, which was, and we didn't live there at that time, but the concentration of blacks lived in that area. So Pyramid Courts, I think up to 20th Street, which is, we're on 20th Street here. Well, this is considered across. 20th Street is right over. And then my dad represented the 3rd Ward, which was like 24th Street all the way up to Union on that side of the community. So these were areas where there was large concentrations of black people. Thus, we were able to get, a sizable amount of representation on the city council at that particular point. And thus, that was just a springboard to there being even more black representation on the city council. Unfortunately, there has been a lot of exodus from Cairo. I think for a variety of reasons. Number one, people just being able to find work. And then also, I think people wanting other experiences that they feel that they were not able to enjoy here. And then also, I think medical reasons, because there's not a hospital here. We don't have a hospital within 30 miles of us. So, there have been elderly people that have said to me, man, the elderly people that maybe moved back here, they said, man, if I had known this, I wouldn't come back here, because this is like a death trap, me being here, and there not being a hospital here. And in earlier times when people were running for like the city council, they would at least say, okay, we're going to try to get a hospital here. We're going to try to make sure that there's at least some type of emergency room. That type of talk doesn't even happen now. So it's changed. Oh, there are a lot of businesses that have exited. Thus, as a result of a mass exodus, the schools, the enrollment is way down. So, unfortunately, there have been a lot of negative things that have happened with Cairo. And the other thing that I feel is that there's been a real factioning and fractioning in the black community. How can I put this? There is no longer a unified, I feel, black community. People are factioned off on different ideas, different goals. Even the churches seem to be factioned off like that, and it's quite unfortunate. Do I have an answer to it right now? No, I don't, except to say that we really do need to be able to come together on some goals. And coming together on some goals doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything I agree with, or that you have to do everything I do, but just come together on what positive goals we're going to have and commit to that. Oh no, not at all. No, I don't feel that at all. I mean, not even as it regards to churches. There even seems to be competition between the churches, and it's unfortunate. I'm going to just be frank with you. I mean, I feel at the nexus of all of it is there is, yes, I know that racism is permeated through every institution of this society, but I do feel that racism is used to divide people. However, I also feel that there are powers to be that looked at, if we allow just a few blacks to be successful, to have things, then the masses will never struggle together for anything again. They will run after the dollar bill. They will run after notoriety. They will run after the illusion of the American dream. Number one, our church. I was christened at Ward Chapel AME, but my dad, shortly afterwards, changed his faith changed his religious affiliation to Baptist. So we began to go to 12th Street, which was called First Missionary Baptist Church, 12th Street, which our sister church was First Missionary Baptist Church, 19th Street. But I have to say that church had an indelible impact upon my growing up, and growing up in a very positive fashion. The deacons of the church were very strong black men that knew who they were. A lot of them had their own businesses, and while that church was a spiritual foundation, they also knew how to run their church like a business. They were very supportive of excellence wherever they saw it. They taught you to present yourself in an excellent manner wherever you went. They taught you that you were representative of your family first, your church, your community. So when people see you, you want to show them that you are the best of the best. And not the best of the best in the African American community, the best of the best. There was nothing that you couldn't do. And that was also a theme of our home. I mean, I actually tell people a lot of times, I would say to my dad would tell me, he would want me to do just things that I felt other people's dads didn't ask them to do. Like, for instance, when I went to Africa, it was because he couldn't go, because it was right before he was going to prison. Thus, he couldn't go because of restriction issues. And he told me to go. I mean, I wanted to go, but he told me, no, you need to go. So I would say to him sometimes with things he'd ask, I'm like, Daddy, I'm a woman, you know that, right? Yeah, but you can do that. So everything in our environment, in my environment, in our environment, I say our environment, it lets you know that you were excellent. You came from wonderful stock. You were the original person of this earth, so there's nothing that you can't do. It really, everything was like a springboard to, you could be the best that you could be. And that was just reinforced when I went to Fisk. And when I think about it, I pledged a sorority at Fisk. And one of the things in our sorority was, when we pledged, you could not do anything on your own. You did something on your own, you had a problem. You were told you had to operate as a unit at all times. And so if you ever hollered out, so you had to say, I, me, my, mine, these are words that do not shine. Us, we, ours, together, these are words that last forever. But that whole thing, and actually I'm in contact with a lot of people from Fisk still, and I oftentimes say to them, I oftentimes ask them questions, they're like, well, you were about that when you came to Fisk. that unity and solidarity was taught in our homes, taught within the framework of the United Front, and taught at our church. So, and even though the United Front was a separate entity from our church, it was a part of our church. My dad was the assistant pastor at our church. So he would come and tell them about different things that were going on politically, different things that were going on in the state legislatively, helping them to understand that God and your life are not separate. You know, you don't run up in the church on Sunday to just come and shout and, you know, run around the church and pray, but God is concerned about all of that. So the United Front, its position was God serves the whole man. God was in it when Dr. King said we're going to deal with these issues of accommodation. We're going to deal with these issues of economics. We're going to deal with these issues of militarism. We're going to deal with it non-violently, but we're dealing with it from a framework of God. God has enabled us to do this. And number one, our church, First Missionary Baptist Church, 12th Street, Ward Chapel, because during the summers we went to Vacation Bible School at Ward Chapel. So even though I was a member of 12th Street, I was still very much so connected to Ward Chapel. Certainly Pyramid Courts, even though it's torn down now. Especially when I went off to school. Well, I did say this. The year after I graduated from school, I ran for mayor here in Cairo. So when I was 22, I ran for mayor. I had just graduated Fisk, so many of my friends from Fisk came here to help me win the mayoral position. I lost by 400 votes. And consequently, that's when I saw a lot of factionalism begin to happen after that in Cairo. And I really feel that there were powers to be that saw this can happen. It could be a black mayor, and we want that if there is a black mayor, we want it to be someone we can control. And you know, sometimes people think, oh, that's conspiracy theories, but all you got to do is open up your eyes. If you're in a hole, get out of it and look at what's going on. What's going on right now shows that there are people who have a vision. They work out their plans. So we better get one and some plans. And I think the first start of it is just acknowledging who you are and being willing to be who you are. Also, some other landmarks, you keep asking me that. The Cairo High School, not the one that's up there now, but the one that I went to when I went to Cairo High School, the old Cairo High School, until my junior year. While it was an old edifice, I loved it. You know, it had windows. That school up there doesn't have windows. It was a place, the junior high was connected to it. So like junior high school students could get to know the high school students. So we were a community. So a lot of times, like people who were so much older than me, they'll come back. I was just at a funeral like about a couple months ago. A person came, they're like, "You're Robbie?" I'm like, "Yes." And she was like, "Do you remember me?" And I was like, "I'm sorry, but that was because those schools were connected." So the older people, or the old heads, as we would say, knew the younger people, and we connected with one another. It wasn't separate, so it wasn't like if you were in junior high, you couldn't know the people in high school. So it really promoted a sense of community, camaraderie. It was a nice, fun time. It really was. No, I'm not that old.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say thank God, because I mean, I'm not gonna say that like that. I mean, I won't say that I would not have wanted to be born during that time, because I just prayed that if I was in existence during that time, that I would have stood up like they stood up. Because I mean, literally, my dad had scars in his head from where he was beaten out at the skating rink when they tried to integrate the skating rink. Literally beaten with chains. And when I say scars, I mean like keloids. Like he used to ask us to massage his scalp so we could feel those keloids. And I should also say, one of my first memories of my dad when I was like 6 years old, he had been beaten by the police in St. Louis, because at that time he was working in St. Louis with what was called the Black Liberators. And they had they were doing a lot of organizing around St. Louis, and the police there had stopped him, and literally they had beaten him. I'll just say, when I saw him after the beating, his head was totally wrapped up. All of his fingers were broken. And he ended up serving 6 months in the St. Louis workhouse for that particular arrest. Different backgrounds and races?
Different backgrounds and races.
Probably the schools provided that opportunity. Other than that, there weren't a lot of places that they interacted, because they definitely didn't interact in church. I mean, there's still black churches, white churches here. I mean, some people say they interact at times, and they probably do. The one white church that is still here that I know definitely was prevalently white was Mighty Rivers, which I can't remember its old name, but Larry Potts was and is the pastor of it. And I will say, it was stated that he killed an old black man who worked for him. Thus, that did not set off any type of, that I remember, any type of organizational thing in the community, but it was known that the man was killed. He was like 70 years old. He said that the man was attempting to rape his wife. But he's down there right now. He lives here. And I think some blacks, they have relationships with him. I mean, I just have to be truthful. I mean, I would see things as different in terms of the races. Because what I mean by that, differences between whites and blacks. Let me give you an example. When I was at Fisk, my youngest brother had come down to visit me, and I had these masks on my wall in my dorm room, and one mask was black, one mask was white. And so I went to get some more of the mask, and my little brother, 9 years old, said, "This is the way it is in real life. The white face is always laughing and the black face is always sad." So the difference is, most whites had a job. I don't care what was going on, they had a job, which in a lot of ways is still the same. They had a job at some institution, a bank, their business, some of the businesses here, some of the restaurants, they worked. A lot of black people did not have a job, or if they did have a job, they had to leave here to get it. I didn't see a vast difference between men and women, except that a lot of black women worked while black men did not. And I don't feel it was because the black men didn't want to work. They couldn't get a job. And if they did get a job, there were a multitude of reasons why they were quickly removed from the job. Thus, amongst quite a few women in our community, the idea was, oh, he don't want to work. When I never felt that was the issue. He didn't want, that was not, he didn't want to work. He wasn't able to work. There were a lot of obstacles, or as my dad would say, obstacles, that were placed in the black man's path, and also in the black woman's path, but more so the black man than the black woman. Yes, I never worked the fields. I mean, let me tell you, I was born in 1964. So I was born 5 years before the United Front was established. So one thing at Fisk that we used to always talk about was standing on the shoulders of those who went before us. I take that very seriously. It was somebody who literally had their heads bashed in for me to be able to work on a certain job. It's very serious to me. I mean, there were people who had their heads blown off for me to be able to vote. So it's very upsetting when I see our own people who have no commitment to any of that. Where some people sacrifice everything. I mean, they sacrificed, and I mean, I lived with some of it. There were a lot of sacrifices that my dad made. A lot of sacrifices that we made to see things better. And you have people come along and it's all about them. I need my mind. I gotta get mine. I have to stack mine. I just happen to believe we're not going anywhere real fast with that. In other words, we as a people are not going anywhere fast with that. And when you look at other races, they honor their past. They honor their traditions. They honor their ancestors. They openly honor who they are. Now, I know there have been a lot of things that have been in our way. I know that there have been a lot of things that have tried to tear our history away from us. And I have to be honest with you, that's one of the reasons why I did this. Why I decided to do this oral history. Because I have to be honest with you, there are a lot of things that we're working on as a family to try to bring together our own history as a family, Koen's that my dad did. But I felt it very imperative that to be a part of this, because there is a definite move on to silence our history. I have a nephew. I have to say this right quick. I just talked to him 2 days ago. He works as a teacher in the school system out in Texas, in Houston, Texas. He said his black principal told him, "You're going to have to be careful talking about slavery because the district doesn't want us to teach on slavery." So what is being told to us on the TV came front and center in my family's life. And I said it to my mom on the other night. She was like, "Well, yeah, he probably needs to be careful because, they need a job." I said, no. We all have to make a sacrifice and decide what is going to be our standing ground. And yes, it may be hard, but you can make it through it. We can't let our history be silenced. So really, like for a tremendous part of my life, I worked with Head Start here in Cairo. Well, let me go back. I will say this: in high school, all throughout my school life here in Cairo, my parents really pushed all of us to academically achieve. So, period. You went up into school to learn. You didn't go into school to socialize. You didn't go into school to play. You didn't go into school to do other stuff. Now let me be clear. Sometimes I did other things, but I very quickly straightened my path. So when I graduated high school, I went directly to Fisk. Fisk definitely has been an integral part of my life. I mean, honestly, there is not a week that goes by that I don't speak with someone that I went to Fisk with. My best friends in life came from Fisk. We're still together. Actually, I experienced my 40th anniversary as an AKA in November. We didn't all go, but some of us went back and celebrated that. And one thing about Fisk, you were taught, first of all, one of the slogans is Fisk, her sons and daughters are ever on the altar. What is the altar? The altar of service and sacrifice. You move forward so that you can bring other people forward with you. Consequently, and I won't say because of anything I said, I guess because of how I lived it, all of my siblings went to Fisk. My younger brother graduated, so he and I graduated, but my two siblings in between, they went. And my younger brother's wife went. It was just it was just a reinforcing of everything that we grew up with to go there. Once I left Fisk, I came back here. I taught in the school system, substitute taught in the school system. Actually, I taught my brother's wife, my youngest brother's wife. She was in my 4th grade classroom. That was a very affirming experience. Again, I ran for mayor. After that, I went to law school for a couple of years. But again, like I said, when my dad went to prison, I came back here in 91. After that, I worked with the school district again for a while. And then after that, I started working with Head Start. So I worked with Head Start from 95 to 2023. Head Start is a wonderful program. And I oftentimes say, if done right, Head Start could change the very complexion of your community. So, but the caveat is if done right. Again, I told you why I'm no longer there. The building closing. I'm not gonna go all into that, but I will say this: one of the things that I did do, with the assistance of others, we did file a lawsuit to try to prevent them from closing that building. We ended up with a judge that had been appointed by Trump. Thus, we did what was called a TRO, but that TRO had to be based upon a grounding suit, as my brother would say. So that grounding suit was the discrimination that I had experienced with different administrators of Southern 7. So we first asked that they be prevented from closing the building. Well, he did not agree to that. And then we asked that the building be reopened, and he didn't agree to that either. He ruled against us on those two positions. But again, as they say, elections have consequences. Well, number one, I would like to see our community become more unified. And when I say that, I mean like not just pockets of different organizations doing anything, but there being an overall unifying vision for Cairo. Now, of course, a wonderful place for that to come from would be from that city council or the city leadership, because they have been tasked with the vision of taking care of Cairo. So that would be a wonderful place for it to come from. But that could be joined in with the community. But I didn't say that I was on the school board here in Cairo from, I think, 95 to 2001. And one of the things that we were able to successfully do with that school board was, when I was on the school board, was that we mixed there was a mixture of coalition. So like, if I lobbed something up from the school board, like I said, I'm putting this on the floor, there were members out in the community who came up to the podium and supported it. Or if they lobbed something up from the community, I was able to support it. You know why? Because we had a vision and we were meeting. We had a plan. We didn't wait for someone to just, and I always use this little statement, they didn't wait to be slapped and then do something. They had a vision, we had a vision and a plan, and we worked that vision and plan. So that I would like to see Cairo come together as a collective rather than pockets of people doing pockets of things in different places. It really, in some ways, is isolated. And what was the second part of what you asked me?
I said, what are your hopes for Carol's future, and what changes would you like to see?
Oh, well, that's the first change in terms of more unity. And I think that as a result of that unity, and as a result of having a coalition, a broad coalition of people involved, and it doesn't mean that it has to be a lot of people, but it should be different sectors. That's one thing that I learned from Head Start very well. Let people bring their talents and let them perform their talents. And thus, it creates the whole. But everybody does need to be involved. And yes, there's certain types of decision making. I mean, you have certain decisions that, just have to be made, so they're regulatory decisions, so someone may have to just say this has to be done. But as much consultation as you can do together, it creates something. It's a man, I forgot his name, I think Covey called it synergy. But what it's about is creating something that I by myself could not create, or two or three people by themselves could not create. So it just gives a whole beauty and collective corporateness to a situation that you can't do by yourself. And of course, I would like to see more business in Cairo. When I was on the school board, one of the things I used to really promote was that as a school, we should have had enough connections with the businesses that if a child decided that they didn't want to go to college or they didn't want to go learn a trade, we should have had enough connections with businesses that we could say, we have this many children that are coming out, we'd like to see them hired in these positions. Let us work together to see where they can be hired, rather than you bringing people over here like this place, Bungie. most of the people that work there, they don't even live in Cairo. They live in Kentucky, Missouri. They're coming into our town, working these jobs. But again, as Frederick Douglass said a long time ago, power concedes nothing without demand. You demand nothing, you get nothing. But if you're looking only from your individual perspective, then you won't demand anything, because you're just looking at day to day what you're attempting to get rather than what is going to build this community. Certainly, we need a hospital. We need better health care opportunities right here. Not only would those things provide more jobs, but it will bring people to the community rather than bringing people to the community who, like for instance now, a lot of people who come to the community come here as a last resort. They're either coming here because they've been unsuccessful somewhere else, or let's say they're in conjunction with or working with the mental health places here. Thus, they're helping them to have a house, to get their meds, etc. So, in other words, I'm not, and don't get me wrong, I'm not assigning a certain worth to any individual's life. But what I am saying is that you want to draw talent. You want to draw thinking. You want to draw innovators. You want to draw visionaries, planners. And you can only do that if you have things that attract people. I don't see it happening right now, no. Do you see it happening right now?
I see, from my perspective as an outsider observing, I do see a core group of people that are working to try to bring some changes to Carroll. I don't know if it's a broad group yet, but there is a core group of people that are in my view are working towards that.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that's happening. A place of rich history. And the question is, what will be written in the future? I don't think so. Okay. Not in any sector. Definitely not in schools. And I don't think it's being done like in any form in the community. Let me give you an example. Like you said, there are core groups. That's what I meant when I said earlier that my question is your core group utilizing the resources in this community? If let's say there are people here that don't even know about your core group, don't even know about what you're doing. You've not even opened it up to the public for them to hear about your core group. Now, of course, everybody has different reasons why they do things. But my question is, and that goes back to motives and intentions. What is your intention? That's what I mean by factionalism. I mean, when I bring up this issue about factionalism, I'm very serious about it. It is a active deterrent, and it really needs to be addressed. That's
okay. Is there
I think this is a good thing, and I hope that it gets the attention that it needs to get. Because I actually think, I shouldn't say good, it's an excellent thing. But it's very important for it to be utilized. So just like what you said earlier about the young people, somehow the young people need to be able to see this. They need to be able to hear this. Like for instance, and not only the young people, but the adults need to know their part in it. Because there's a part in the Bible where, well, there's several parts in the Bible, but there's a part in the Bible where Moses or God, I don't know, so it was instructed somehow that when the children of Israel left Egypt going to the land of Canaan, that they rehearse in the ears of their children the history of what happened during that trek, how they got over. They were even instructed to take 12 stones out of the Jordan as a memoriam of the fact that they went over the Jordan, thus moving into the promised land. And so I'm saying that we as older people have the responsibility of making sure that we're rehearsing that we're giving that history to our younger children. Small things like my nephews, I took them down to see the cornerstone at Ward Chapel. That's a small thing, but that's important for them to understand that. And I remember it was so hot. We were trying to get into church, and at that time I think they were having services downstairs. But I had so hyped it up to them that they were like eager to get in that church. And I was tiring of going up and down the steps trying to get into church, and we weren't getting in. And so one of the nephews, and they were like maybe no more than 8 or 9 at that time, they were like, they're up in there playing the piano, but they won't let us in. And I said, well, I don't have a phone. I said, I don't know the number in there, so we can't call them. So it was so hot on that day that I was just ready to get back in the car. So we got down the street, and one of the nephews, we forgot to see a cornerstone. So we had to go back and walk up the stairs again to see the cornerstone. But we have a responsibility to bring that history to them. And actually, the very nephew who told me about the slavery thing was the one that said we didn't get to see the cornerstone. So what I'm saying, the attitude that we bring to our history will also affect the lives of the children. And they may not always respond how we want them to respond. Like last year, at this time, I was teaching a 10th, 11th, and 12th grade English in in a place, not here in Cairo, in a place somewhere else. And during Black History Month, we did a lot of things toward teaching Black history, particularly during a segment during the day which was called SEL, Social Emotional Learning. Some of the things that came out of the mouths of those children was just absolutely ridiculous. Like one young lady talked about how she didn't like Dr. King, that she felt he was just horrible. He went with white women. I mean, it was clear that there were a lot of conspiracy theories that had been thrown out there. She said this out loud in front of the entire class. Then when I brought up the fact that when he went down to Memphis, the garbage workers, he went down there because there was a couple of garbage workers that had been killed in the back of the garbage truck. And why would they be stupid enough to go in the back of the garbage truck? I said, they went back there because it was raining. They had no other choice. And thus they ended up being killed because it wasn't realized that they were in the back of the garbage truck. Do you think somebody would want to sit amongst garbage? But even though that was some of the responses, there were others who they went home, they talked to their parents about, what they had learned. They brought back pictures from the 60s era. There were others who grasped onto it, and the way you looked was the way I was looking. In fact, I was mad. I really had to try to compose myself because some of the stuff was so far out that I'm like, where has this been born from? What has happened? Where have we gone wrong? Because out of all of my years of dealing with students, and I've dealt with students for a while, I never heard that type of response like that. So I had sent to one of my sorority sisters a picture of my dad. When he was in the St. Louis workhouse, he went on a spiritual water fast in protest of being in prison when he was the one that had been beaten almost to death. So he was in the St. Louis workhouse for 6 months. He went on a spiritual water fast for 40 days and 40 nights. Well, thus, as a result of that, he almost lost his life. Well, I sent this picture to her because I was watching a documentary on Homer G. Phillips Hospital, which was a black hospital in St. Louis. And I didn't know the history behind Homer G. Phillips like that when we were going to Homer G. Phillips to visit my dad. So during that time that he was in prison up there, we would go up there to visit him a lot, and we were going to do advocacy for him because we were trying to get him out of the jail because he was really, really ill, like to the point of almost death. And there was a lot of activism and movement around movement around him and his situation, particularly in the St. Louis area. We stayed with the famed choreographer and dancer Catherine Dunham, who lived in East St. Louis. She actually is my brother King David's godmother. But she and others around there were doing a lot of activism around my dad's plight. And literally, he was chained to the bed in Homer G. Phillips Hospital. And it was just a lot of games and things. But I sent her this picture because what I ended up finding out, which I didn't know when she and I pledged together, her dad trained at Homer G. Phillips Hospital and actually was a doctor there. And what the documentary was talking about was how, during segregation, even though segregation was hard, those institutions taught our black people to be excellent. They taught them to be thorough. And in that documentary, they literally went through like many names of physicians and RNs that had trained at Homer G. Phillips Hospital. And they also went through how terrible it was when Homer G. Phillips Hospital was closed. And then I look back to that. I mean, it's like so, what is the word I want to say? Just like eye-opening, because it's like I was living the history. My dad was involved with that movement to prevent them from closing Homer G. Phillips Hospital. So I sent this picture to her of my mom, because my mom and my dad, it was a picture of my mom sitting at my dad's bedside, but she was expecting my brother King David, because it was while my dad was doing the spiritual water fast, he came with the name, he said God told him to name him King David. And then there was another picture of the famous civil rights attorney William Kunstler, who had come there to try to see what he could do to help him. So I think a lot of the major sacrifices that he made was when he had to go to jail for a lot of the things that he believed in. Because of his stance, and my dad, while he worked toward seeing black people experience social, economic, psychological empowerment, he meant that for white people too. He fought for the upliftment of man. And most people don't understand that, but he really did. So consequently, I look at things that people see as negative now, like even like the show, I think, the Dukes of Hazzard. We watch the Dukes of Hazzard, and we think about how they used to play that song. I think I wish I was in the land of Dixie. My brother told me a story about how he and my dad met that man. I think Uncle, whoever was the old man in the Dukes of Hazzard, they met him at an airport out in Colorado. And my brother talked about how he just talked to that man just for hours, because he was the type of person that just saw people as people. So some of the sacrifices that he made was that a lot of people didn't understand him. I mean, a lot of times when he was traveling because he didn't have work here. He didn't find work here. I mean, he applied at this college to teach at this college. My dad had a doctorate, but he never taught here. So he was not allowed to teach here. So those were sacrifices that he made. He could have gone into those courts when they accused him of, when they brought him up on charges of burning his own bank building. When they brought him up on charges the last time he was in jail of stealing a building, stealing an edifice. They literally made a law and said he stole an edifice. He could have gone in there and pled guilty or played games, but each time he went to prison and dealt with it. So how did he overcome it? He overcame those things by his trust in God and his continued faith in people, particularly faith in the Cairo people. Because, many times he would try to talk to me about having more faith and patience, particularly with people around here. So he was an eternal optimist. And to be honest with you, From 2011 to 2017, he was in jail in state for stealing a building, stealing a building that was his building. And he got out of jail on my mother's birthday, June 2nd, 2017. By July 20th, 2018, he was dead. He had cancer, and I think probably he had it when he was in jail. You know, whether he knew it or not, we don't know. But I say that to say, even with all of that happening, his spirit of perseverance, determination, knowledge of who he was. I mean, he was who he was, whether he was with a prince, king, or pauper. He was himself. His just enormous confidence in himself and enormous faith in God and people is something that just keeps you going. I do have to say this, one of the things as he remained in prison, you know, for a long time, really like from the 2011 2017, because all of the things we did, all of the appeals, everything, nothing was successful. He spent the whole time that he was sentenced in jail. I began to think about this song a lot. The leader of the band is tired and his eyes are growing old, but his blood runs through my instrument and his song is in my soul. Dan Fogelberg. Hold up. My life has been a poor attempt to imitate the man. I'm just a living legacy to the leader of the band.
What do you think is his legacy here in Carroll?
Well, number one, his legacy here in Carroll was the beginning of the United Front. The United Front made a lot of changes in terms of how black people live their lives here. Employment in these places. They fought for a lot of black people to get employment here, and some of them didn't get employment. Like my dad didn't move forward to get those jobs. I mean, he always had a spirit of service rather than let me run to be the first, or even us. We didn't get the jobs either as his posterity. You know, it was you serve, you step back, you let other people move forward. The housing, they started what was called Little Egypt housing. So during Jimmy Carter's administration, the houses that black people had gotten through FHA and could not keep because they couldn't afford them, he got integrally involved with Jimmy Carter's administration, and they were somehow able to work out for those houses to become Section 8 houses. So they got the HUD subsidy, and they were able to be in those houses according to their income. So several of these single development housing or single family units that you see around town that now are owned by someone else, unfortunately, it's not black owned anymore, but that came through the United Front in Little Egypt. Little Egypt became like the housing arm of the United Front. So thus, that was a part of a plan to make sure that black people were able to get into housing that was livable rather than substandard, and housing that they could afford.